Hi guys, I'm Brad Montgomery and welcome to The Breakdown. And here we talk about investing, science, and psychology. Today we're going to be talking about fire weather forecasting and just wildfires in general, and we're going to be learning a lot of stuff. Before we get started, if you missed any of our episodes, you can always go to kfoxtv.com/the-breakdown. Now let's break it down. And I'm here with Tom Bird, fire weather forecaster with the National Weather Service. I've known Tom for a long time. I've thought his job is fascinating and interesting, and we're going to learn a lot about what a fire weather forecaster does. I know a lot of people, including myself, initially had never even heard of a specific fire weather forecaster or fire weather forecasting. So this is going to be a great opportunity to just kind of open things up and learn about what you do, how you help the public, and basically how you're involved when it comes to fire weather forecasting and exactly what it is. So let's start off there. I mean, what I found so fascinating personally is your job just takes you all over the place. So let's start with what it is that you do.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for having me on, Brad. I got a real passion for this. And just like you, when I got out of college, I had no idea that the National Weather Service did fire weather forecasting. I came from the Texas Gulf Coast, so of course I was going to get into tropical meteorology. Then I came out here and I found out about the fact that we do fire weather. And that happened to be a niche that I fit into perfectly.
Nice.
So that's what I do now. I've specialized. I've had hours upon hours, hundreds and hundreds of hours of specialized training, basically micro meteorology, to where we're talking about meteorology on a real small scale for each hill, each valley, each mountain, right? And so a lot of that extra training to help dial in a broad forecast to a very specific area where that fire might be burning. And so now what I do is when there's a large fire in progress, they put a type 1 or a type 2 team on there to manage that fire, and they pull in technical specialists. And one of them is what I do is a fire weather forecaster. So I go actually into the field and work with the teams on the fire site itself and provide meteorological services.
And we're going to dive into that because they literally they ship him off to wildfires. I mean, this is just, it's incredible. So before we get into what you do even more, we do have a viewer question. Producer Laura?
Yes, we do, Brad. Our viewer question today is, what are the most common mistakes that people make that cause fires?
Well, one is negligence, right? Where you go out and you start a campfire and you don't put it out completely. I've actually done that myself, and I work with these folks and I know how to put a fire out, but it's not really easy. When you get a campfire, there's a lot of heat in there. You don't want to walk away until it's cold, right?
You think it's out.
You think it's out. You've done a lot of work for it, but man, those embers can really hold. The other thing is kind of ignorance, and I don't mean being stupid, I just mean not knowing what's happening. Like if you're towing a trailer and dragging a chain, you're making sparks, right? And if you're driving through the forest or through grass country, it's easy to start a fire like that. You see that happen a lot in what we do. The other thing is, like say you're driving your car, your truck, and you've been driving a while and you pull off the road and there's tall grass. Well, your exhaust is very hot, and all of a sudden you're parked on top of grass, the grass is touching the exhaust, you start a fire. We see that a lot too. So sometimes it's negligence, sometimes it's, ignorance. Not really knowing what you're doing there.
Now, what can bring about, so and this is where we kind of pivot to the meteorological side, and it's, what can bring about some of the higher fire danger conditions or some of the worst fire conditions, meteorologically speaking?
There's really 3 or 4 things that we look at on how intense a fire will burn, right? And that really starts with how dry are the fuels. Well, how dry the fuels are depends on how dry the air is. Because the air, if it's really dry, will suck the moisture out of the plants, out of the trees, the bushes, the grass, and dry them out. And then they're more susceptible to burning because they're drier now. The other thing is the wind. The wind is a driver of how fast and which direction the fire goes. And so we really look at those 2 things most. A couple other things we look at is how warm is it? How hot is it? The hotter it is, the more ignitable the temperatures are, and how unstable it is. So unstable is does the air want to move up away from the Earth's surface? If it does, think about a fire. That's what a fire is doing. It's taking air near the surface and rising it up because it's producing a lot of heat.
Right.
Well, if the atmosphere is also unstable, that just enhances how much lift you get over fire.
And
what's happening there is new air is coming in because the fire burns the oxygen out of the air, but fire needs oxygen to burn. And so what you're doing with the unstable atmosphere is you're pulling in more air with more oxygen to burn the fuels.
So I never even would have thought about that. So it's more efficient.
Yes,
basically,
that's all those things, those four things: the winds, the temperatures, the instability, and the dryness. Those four things work together, and if they're all in the wrong direction, they all combine with each other to make fire conditions critical and extreme.
And and since we're there, and this is actually, we were just talking about this before the podcast, and this is something that just happened to be more recent. What happened in Hawaii?
Oh yeah.
I mean, so I guess some of the thinking may be, if it was ignited by power lines. I think there was a hurricane in the area, and I want to make specific. It wasn't like a hurricane close enough to bring rainfall. No. And these areas were on the leeward side, on the dry side, so it would have had a hard time getting rainfall unless it was right over it or it had changed the wind direction. So the hurricane was far enough away, but close enough that it was bringing wind. I think probably higher pressure off on the other side.
Right. Yeah.
And so you had this kind of wind funneling over the islands. And I mean, and that's one of the ingredients you're talking about. Wind, I guess, maybe some dryness.
Well, yeah, a couple of things with that fire there. If you've ever been to the Hawaiian Islands, the north side and the east side of every island is where all the water falls, all the rain. On the south and the west side of every island, it's the leeward side, it's the dry side. It's where they actually have drought, believe it or not, down on the Hawaiian Islands. That's where that city is. And so it was in a drought-stricken area. It was very dry. And then you had the hurricane well south, pulling a lot of extra air across the island, so kicking up the wind. So you did have the dryness and you had the wind. The other thing is, we call this a wildland-urban interface. And
you were talking about that, yeah.
So what happens is, if you have a city that's surrounded by a bunch of vegetation, and we have some here in our area that are critical. Okay. Ruidoso, Cloudcroft, Silver City. There's a lot of places.
Beautiful places.
They're places everybody wants to live, right? But man, they are in the middle of the forest. You just cut a little hole, put a city in there, and now it's surrounded by vegetation that on a drought year or a year or anything. And we saw that last year with the McBride fire in Ruidoso, where you had a strong wind day, power lines sparked, I think is what it was. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. And then you had a start right there in the city. And with the winds driving 60, 70 miles per hour that day, there's really not a whole lot you can do to stop it.
And you don't have a lot of lead time.
You don't have zero lead time. Yeah. And at that point, all the first responders are doing is trying to get people out of the way. Because it's going to burn what it's going to burn. You can't do anything about it. So that's the wild land and urban interface. And that's what happened down in Hawaii, and that's what happens here. We've had several fires that burn in and around these mountain communities, and that's where you see a lot of loss of structure in those situations.
And you were talking about, and before because I want to get to some of the places that you've gone and some of the stuff you've seen, but you were talking about the basically the containment kind of the way of thinking of how to contain these fires. How does that generally go? Because and I never thought about this. I mean, we see it play out all the time on the news, but I guess in worst case scenarios, you can't contain them. In worst case scenarios, you gotta. There's a little bit of a waiting game.
Right. Well, in worst case scenarios, all the elements are stacked against the team that's managing the fire. No. If the vegetation is dry and dense, then you've got a lot to burn. If the topography is lined up with the winds, then that's going to speed the direction of the increase or the advancement of the fire. If you're in drought and the fuels are extremely dry, they're going to burn. As the instant flame touches them, they're going to start igniting, or even before, they'll pre-ignite. And so what happens is there are certain situations, and it's very common, where a fire gets started and the team could throw anything it wanted to at it, and it wouldn't make that big a difference. Wow. Because the fire is such a huge force of nature that it will override any
barrier,
any tactics, any strategies, anything you do. You can put tanker after tanker of slurry on it, it's still going to burn right through it.
Wow, and so, that's interesting.
So sometimes we're out there when we're on the fires, and I wouldn't say just sitting there watching it burn. We're trying to get people out of the way, keep people safe, maybe try to corral it away from some sensitive areas and stuff like that. But we're not stopping it, and we're not putting it out. I mean, they just can't do it because the conditions are just too bad.
And so that gets me to your job specifically, which is, again, fire weather forecaster, just pretty incredible thing to do. So they basically shuttle you to some of these fires around the country. And I'm guessing, the West seems to be a little bit less consistent on rainfall compared to the Eastern U.S. If you do, broad brush, obviously you got the Washington coast or whatever. There's exceptions, but broad brush. So are you usually kind of shuttled around the West? As far as, or have you made trips all over? I know sometimes they have New Jersey wildfires. I
haven't been to New Jersey. I haven't been to the East Coast so much as for fire anyway.
Okay.
I have been to Miami for a hurricane. I've been to Louisiana for Katrina and Rita hurricane. Oh, wow. But all my fires have been from Texas west.
Okay.
So I've been from coast to coast.
Okay.
And when you talk about fires and why we're out there, I'll tell you one thing. First off, being a fire weather forecaster, and what I am is an incident meteorologist.
Okay.
It's called an IMET, and so I go to mostly fires, and that's the big incident. It's a pretty stressful situation for me. It's a lot of responsibility because the two reasons I'm there is, number one, first and foremost, is firefighter and public safety. And second is to help make sure that their tactics are going to be successful. In other words, if they want to fight fire over here, but the wind's blowing in that direction, maybe not the best thing to do. It wouldn't be a good safety thing, and it wouldn't really be successful. So I'm there for those two reasons.
How close do they get you? Do they? I mean, because, and I'm guessing they move you, right? I mean, what do they want you within 10 miles? Do they want you?
No.
Within 20 miles?
So I'm in helicopters flying over the fire, just so I can get the lay of the land, so I can tell what the land is going to do to the wind direction and speed. I am on the line with my fire shelter and my helmet and my Nomex shirt. If you've seen on TV what a firefighter looks like in the field, I look just like them. I'm
you're
dressed
right there with
exactly
them.
like them. I'm there with my gloves on. I've got a tool. I don't fight the fire, but I'm out there to get information on how the weather is impacting the fire behavior itself.
So you're right there on the front lines.
So I'm there, but I also am back in camp. That's where I have internet connectivity. That's where I have my computer, my printer, and all that, and that's where I create the forecasts.
Okay.
And that's also where I brief all the firefighters and the overhead staff that are going to go out and employ tactics to try to contain that fire.
Okay, well then I got to ask you this then. Like, has there ever been a time when you were concerned about your safety? I mean, like something, maybe sea breeze came in off the Pacific a little farther inland and then changed things up? Or
Only one time. I've been on 62 fires so far, which I looked, when I first started 24 years ago, that's when I first started doing IMET details. There's only 4 other people that have more fire experience, been to more fires than me. So I'm pretty up there.
You are.
So I've been on a lot of fires, over 62 fires. Only one time have I been nervous, and I was went on a fire. We have technical specialists. I'm one. The other one is the fire behavior analyst.
Okay.
Now the fire behavior analyst, he takes my information and he looks at the fuels and the topography, and he tells all the firefighters, today this is what the fire is going to do. It's going to grow this far. The flame lengths are going to be this high. And here's the concerns that you on the line need to watch out for. So the two of us, he and I, work shoulder to shoulder, very close together. And one time I was out in the field with one of those fire behavior analysts, and we were walking across the top of the fire, and we walked past the fire, and as we did, it started burning up the hill behind us.
Oh, no.
And we had crossed a wooden bridge, which they had already wrapped in foil to try to keep it from burning. And when we turned around to go to that bridge was on fire. But we ran across the burning bridge and got back into a safe spot. And that's the thing,
Did your area burn later? Did you look at it?
Oh, yeah, the area we were walking through, it was gone within the hour.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, but we're pretty smart about where we go. I mean, it's all about safety and taking and risk and making sure the risk can be mitigated and it's worth what you're doing is worth the risk. And so they really try their best to keep us out of situations where we could get hurt.
Yeah, because you don't want to lose you for sure.
Oh, no, not at all.
Right. Well, that's what I wondered, and so okay. And lately, I guess some of the fires that have been most notable around here, you mentioned the McBride.
Right.
Were there some others in the Gila?
Remember in the Gila, the Black Range fire last year. is now the second largest fire in New Mexico history. So I was lucky enough to be on that, I guess, if you want to call that lucky.
Yeah.
But before that, we had the Calf Canyon Hermit's Peak fire, which was in northern New Mexico.
Okay, I'd heard of it.
It burned for well over 2 months, 3 months maybe, and it's now the largest fire ever in New Mexico recorded history. Before that, back in 2012, was the Whitewater Baldy fire in the Gila, which was at the time the largest fire, but last year it got superseded by 2 fires.
Wasn't the Whitewater Baldy, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the one that threatened the major power lines, the transmission lines?
Yes, yes, and it also burned around the catwalk area in Glenwood. And then something we don't talk about or put enough emphasis on is post-fire effects, where we burned out the canyon above the catwalk, which is a really nice historic recreational site, and then flash flooding and debris flows came down and wiped it all out. Well, it's been since rebuilt, thank goodness, because it's a treasure for southern New Mexico.
So so fire weather forecasting. Basically, you mentioned one thing really interesting, and I just want to kind of hone in on this. And this is something I didn't realize. The Forest Service, or who fights the fire specifically? What is the
Land Management Agency?
Okay.
So there's Forest Service, BLM, the states, Fish and Wildlife, BIA, like the mescaleros, BIA.
And they try to. So if you've got a bad fire going, you can kind of direct it. You try to steer it
You do the
away
best you
from.
can.
Okay. So I had never even thought about that, kind of the steering of the fire.
I want to talk about one thing real quick.
Yeah.
There's 3 major influencers on a fire.
Okay.
And this will explain why I go to fires. Number 1 is the topography.
Okay.
The lay of the land, the hills, the ridges, the streams, the valleys, and all that kind of stuff, because fires tend to work along topography.
Do they like to go up streams and kind of like?
Well, they like to go up drainages.
Okay.
A fire loves to burn uphill. It's slow to burn down.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. So it's a triangle. So 1 is the topography.
Okay.
Number 2, the second leg of that is the vegetation. What's it composed of? How much of it is there? Is it dry and drought and all that kind of thing? Bark
beetle and
other beetle kill and all the trees are dead, and so they're really susceptible to burn. So that's 2, and that's where the fire behavior analyst comes in. He looks at those 2 components. I look at the third leg, which is the fire weather. And out of those 3, okay, you got topography, fuels, and weather. Which one changes the most?
Weather.
The weather. It's changing all the time. Which one can you not see?
The weather.
Right. You can see the topography, you can see the fuels, but you can't see the wind, you can't see how dry it is, you can't see how hot it is or how unstable. And so that's where firefighters have a hard time with situational awareness, and that's why we have meteorologists on fires.
I have a interesting little fire story, and it's only one really. I was out in this little town, it's east of Phoenix, called Superior.
Okay.
Arizona.
I know
it's
that.
About maybe 40, 60 miles east of Phoenix. And
right.
You start to go up a little bit in elevation, and it was evening. It was monsoon season, and we were all out there, and there was this fire in the hills, a little bit further up from Superior. There was really no threat to Superior because it was still kind of it's like in the middle area where it's still kind of deserty with some scrub oak, right? So it's not really grassy necessarily. Yeah. And a storm popped up near us, and we were kind of watching a light show. And then as the winds from that storm interacted with that fire, I mean, those flames were luckily it was literally on the other side of kind of this little canyon-y kind of little creek thing, so we felt okay. But I mean, those flames were just slamming around like every which way. And I mean, and it got our attention.
You bring up a huge safety concern on fires, and that's the outflow from thunderstorms. And go back to the Yarnell Hill fire. It's in Arizona, Prescott, Arizona. This was just, I think, 10 years ago now. 19 firefighters died.
That's right.
And what happened was there was thunderstorms on the Mogollon Rim to the north, and they were collapsing, putting out outflows. And we're real familiar with outflows around here. We see them all the time. They kick up dust and stuff like that.
Cool us down sometimes.
Yeah, they cool you down. But if you have a fire, now what's happening is the winds will often shift 180 degrees. And so instead of the winds blowing at your back and the fire is moving away from you, now the winds are in your face and the fire is now turned around and moving back at you. And maybe they were blowing 5 miles an hour, now they're blowing 55 miles an hour. And so that's a big issue. And as far, when you look at fire fatalities and burnovers, you do the research from, as far back as you can look to now and all across the country, more times than not, by a huge margin, the issue is an unexpected weather change. Another reason why
That's
have
why
us
they got
on
you.
fires.
Yeah. Okay. And like you said, you can't see that necessarily.
Right.
So, and it's interesting even here. I mean, and it's amazing sometimes. And I know you can relate just in our weather, just to pull it back just for a second, because it's like there have been times those outflow boundaries can go quite a while.
Oh yeah.
And there's been times here where we're like, where'd this dust come from? And you
Right.
have to back up the radar, and you're looking within like sometimes over 50 miles away.
Well, we get backdoor outflows from, and I say backdoor, they come from the east, from Lubbock, Amarillo, the Texas Panhandle.
That's
that
right.
brings all the dust. That you go to bed at night, and you wake up in the morning, the sky is
Hazy,
milky
yep,
white,
yep.
hazy. That's outflow from big, huge, severe thunderstorms out in the plains. It pushes it, so it can go hundreds of miles.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And that I got to track that.
Yeah.
I've got to watch for that kind of stuff.
Now, because growing up in Southern California, I remember it was a big deal. There were some notable California fires when I was a kid. The Oakland fires. They actually did, I think, some kind of short TV movie on that. Or I remember seeing that.
Yeah.
That burned all the way down to the coast.
Right.
We had one when I was a kid that started either in the hills of Orange or San Diego County, and it burned all the way down to the coast with offshore winds.
Right.
And I remember it really surprised us watching.
And
it
as a
get all-
meteorologist, you know what those winds are called.
Santa Ana.
Those are the Santa Ana
Yeah,
winds,
yeah.
right? And that's the weird thing about California fires is usually what happens around here, especially, is our fires are more intense. They grow biggest during the day.
Mm-hmm.
At night, the R8 it cools, the RH comes up, and the fire slows down. In California, a lot of times, especially on the coast, it's the exact opposite. They grow most at night because the Santa Ana winds kick in at night.
Mm-hmm.
They're offshore. They go down slope, so they heat and they dry. And so
bad combination.
Yeah, and so it's a totally different mindset to work fires in California, and that's why I used to be afraid as an IMET to go out there because I'm not used to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I did get to work a couple of California fires and quite enjoyed working out there in
You
California.
got kind of a feel for it.
Yeah, it's good to stretch yourself and get into new regimes.
And have you ever, when you've been out there forecasting, obviously thunderstorm outflows are a concern. Is there a time when you just kind of pull everybody back because you say, you know what, we've got some thunderstorms developing? And the reason I say this is because there was a fire, and I don't know if it had to do, if it was probably sparked by thunderstorms initially. I think it was north of Lake Tahoe, where they actually issued a tornado warning.
Oh
on it.
yeah.
And because it actually had a mesocyclone type, it wasn't just a fire
Right.
whirl. I mean,
Right.
it was actually a rotating. Have you ever just pulled people back and just said, hey, you know what?
Oh, yeah.
We're not even.
It's interesting. So that I was on the first. I'm pretty sure I was on the first fire that had a really good documented fire tornado on it. Wow. It was the Missionary Ridge fire near Durango, Colorado.
Okay.
And we were getting reports in camp on the radio of a tornado with fire in it. And I was like kind of saying, nah.
Right.
Because the thunderstorm didn't look that strong. And so I didn't think it was capable of a tornado. But the fire whirl kind of enhances that. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot of video documentation of that, a lot of damage, a lot of big, huge trees snapped and all that. But yeah.
Wow.
In camp or in the field, wherever, I have a radio on me just like everybody else does, right? And if I see something on radar or satellite or observations that tell me that there's something of concern, I'm instantly on the radio talking to every single person on that fire, telling them what's happening, where it's going to happen, and when I think it's going to happen. And we have safety officers on these fires too. Okay. And I work very closely with those guys. And I say, hey, if I see this, what are we going to do about it?
Got it.
And so we come up with a plan of attack to keep people safe. We did this back when the spaceship Columbia came out of the sky in East Texas. It was in spring, and so it was severe weather season. We had tornadoes running through the areas that all these firefighters were searching for debris from Columbia Space Shuttle. And so I sat down with all the safety officers from the different camps and said, okay, if I say I see something severe coming, what are we going to do? Because these folks are in the woods and trees and stuff, and so it's very dangerous. So we sit down, we have a plan that says if I see something, I say this, and then this is what happens to get everybody safe. And so a lot of times there's crew buses, and we just have everybody get in buses.
and just get them out.
Get out. Yeah.
So, and I like that. So all that layering and layered security, that basically you don't see the losses of firefighters, I guess, anymore like that.
It's so sad that you would think that we'd learn all the lessons that you'd have to learn,
right,
and it would never happen again.
Right.
But it still happens because accidents are accidents. Yeah. A lot of these accidents are people just driving to and from on the fire or to the fire away.
Okay.
Some accidents they're having to cut trees all the time with chainsaws. It's a very dangerous activity where tops of trees fall out before you expect them to as they're falling, and you just don't have one person sawing. You have other people around, and so. There's that, and then there are the burnovers where you have an unexpected event of some sort.
Like Arizona.
Like Yarnell Hill.
Now let me ask you. So to keep everybody safe, as safe as we can, what are some ways that we can prevent wildfires? I mean, like you said at the top, and there's certain things we don't think about. I mean, I guess they always say like. I'll read some of the fire weather discussions from time to time other parts of the country, don't throw your cigarettes out today, right, or don't, But the interesting one about the car, I mean, don't drive your car over, I mean, and make sure your campfire is out. I mean, is that basically the gist of it, or?
That's a big part of it.
Okay.
But like if you're riding a motorcycle through the forest, like a dual sport or a dirt bike, exhaust have spark arresters, so sparks don't shoot out. If you live in a WUI, a wildland urban interface, make sure that you don't throw embers out your chimney, when you're burning, in your chimney to keep heat. Make sure you have the same thing, spark catcher up there. If you do live in a WUI where there's vegetation up against the house, try to clear it out, do stuff like that to try to protect your house. But a lot of this stuff is just common sense, no-brainer stuff. You don't shoot fireworks in the forest at any time, especially when it's dry and droughty. Right, like this year, we're supposed to have a monsoon. I don't know where it is.
Never materialized. We're still.
But here's the deal. This year we went into fire season. Yeah. Really wet from last year. We had a really good monsoon,
true.
right? And so we didn't have much of a fire season in New Mexico. Last year I worked 5 different fires in the state of New Mexico. This year I went to Colorado to work a fire. I didn't work any down here because we've had a lot of small fires. Yeah. And there's 2 kinds of starts. There's the natural starts and there's the human starts. We want to try to eliminate all the human starts because most of that, like I said, is negligence or ignorance. The natural starts, there's really only one, lightning, right? And you can't stop that because we're going to have dry lightning. We're going to have those storms that are high base and the rain evaporates and you're going to get a strike. It's going to hit a tree, some kind of susceptible fuel bed. It's going to start a fire. But if it's a good year like it was this year, you don't get a big fire.
Right, that's true. And it's interesting how it does seem like the trees can hold on to some of that moisture.
Oh yeah.
I've even after last year or 2 years ago when we had the really wet monsoon, I noticed that spring the trees leafing out really nice. Sure. And I was like, I guess they still held on to some. And we get a little bit of rain over the winter time. To be fair.
We did. Yeah, sure.
But again, it's you're right. This year hasn't been, even though we haven't really had a summer thunderstorm season. And it's interesting. Really quickly, he mentioned the high base thunderstorms, and I remember I don't watch for it as much anymore, but every now and then I would watch for it and I would get concerned because every now and then the monsoon would spill over into LA. Well, it's like the mountains there can kind of take it a little bit, but every now and then that monsoonal moisture and those drier thunderstorms, especially at the onset, they would spill up into Washington and Oregon.
Yes.
And I was like, oh no. And
that's kind of what's happening now up there.
Yeah.
I mean, they're usually on the fringe of the monsoon. Mm-hmm. There's a channel of good moisture, but to the east and to the west, you can get thunderstorms, but you don't get rain.
Right.
Or if you get very little rain. So if you get lightning out of those, that's where the lightning starts are. And so if you look right now, the western coast, Oregon, Northern California, Washington, that's where the fires are. A lot of that is lightning starts.
Just on the edge of that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, thank you very much. And where can people go, Tom, to find out more information about fire weather, fire conditions, if they're going to be going somewhere, or just general weather information?
Well, I think for forecast, there's the National Weather Service site, weather.gov/fire. And then if you want to know about what fires are ongoing now and what kind of resources are on them and all that, there's a great website. It's national. It's called INCI-Web. So it's like Incident Web, but it's INCI Web. So just look up INCI-Web.
And we'll put that up for you.
Yeah, okay. and it'll have a national map and it'll show all the different fires. You click on the little icon and it'll pull up that fire and tell you what they're doing with that fire.
Awesome.
Really nice.
That's really, really cool. Well, this has been just great. We're going to have to end it here because we
too
can keep
bad.
going.
Yeah,
I know.
I know.
Thank you very much, Tom Bird,
bet,
and
right?
National Weather Service Fire Weather Forecaster. Yes, that's a real title, and that is his title. And thank you again for coming on.
You bet. It's been great to be with everybody. Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to comment, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can check out our past archive of episodes on kfoxtv.com or listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for breaking it down with me, and we'll see you next time here on The Breakdown.